me the other day that his mom makes him do a school exam paper every single day after school, paper 1 plus paper 2, and that he does that basically 7 papers every week. What do you think that?
7 papers every week and paper 1 and paper 2. That means
that's
2.5 hours every day for math.
Yes.
Okay, I think that yes, first thing, practice makes perfect, but it's a misconception that parents do have, because when they do it, when they do the paper, they practice. But what happens after doing the paper? Is there any guidance on like, oh, why did they make a mistake here? Why did they what is the problem with this question and things like that?
So you're saying that there needs to be instantaneous feedback from someone in order to tell them what they have done correctly and what they have done wrongly?
Yes, I think it's very important to have immediate feedback, especially for students who are generally weaker, because the more they do, the more mistakes they make, I feel.
That reminds me of a case where I had this student who was always doing the same thing over and over again, and basically he was simply always repeating the same mistake. And when you ask him how come he keeps making the same mistake, why hasn't anybody corrected you before? And he says that no one has corrected me, that's why I always do it the same way, I thought it's correct. And I think after a while that becomes a bit of a habit that becomes very hard to change when there isn't instantaneous feedback being provided to them, or there isn't a proper form of structure that's given to their learning, so that they are able to understand, what are the proper processes or methods that I need to use to answer the different kinds of questions. I think that's something that's very important.
And another thing that I feel that is important is also the structure has to be incremental. So, for example, if the student is particularly weak at paper 2, and then you keep giving paper 1 instead of paper 2, or you give both papers, it's not really helpful to help him to improve in his paper 2 per se.
I agree, but it's human tendency to always focus on areas of weaknesses, obviously, especially if you're a parent. But when it comes to math, I think math is a lot of a confidence subject. So we do need to make sure that not just focus on the areas of weaknesses, but we're also focusing on areas of strengths, because that is something that gives the student confidence. And math is a subject where you only get better when you are confident about what you are doing, whether it's in a particular chapter or whether it's in a particular skill set. As you get confident, that gives you more confidence, and that gives you the strength to actually move on to deal with your areas of weaknesses. Otherwise, if you find that you are always struggling, you may not always be struggling with math, but you may be struggling with specific concepts in math. And if you are not given other things within, for example, concepts that you're stronger in to deal with, and you're always dealing with only the concepts you struggle with, I think that makes it very demoralizing for the student to learn. So there has to be a proper mix and balance in what you give the students, not just to deal with their weaknesses, but also to reinforce their strengths.
I think that reminds me of my student. Or my student, she's particularly weak in math. Okay, some basic concepts she just cannot get it. So I think for her, I try to make my lessons more interesting. So I try to incorporate some games and some activities to let her feel that it's not as difficult as it seems. So it's important to instill some fun and motivation, so she can be more motivated in terms of learning math concepts.
How do you make sure that lessons are fun while making sure that objectives of the lessons are still met? Because at the end of the day, people don't come for tuition because they want to have fun. People come for tuition because they want a certain form of results. So how do you make that balance between the two?
So the balance between games and actual lessons, right? So we have to try, for myself, the lesson has to be something relatable to real life. So for example, like topics like money, we can actually link it back to real life. So we give them role play scenario so that they can get to try out role playing like the customer and the cashier. So they can actually try to see how we can make the word problems become alive. So with that, then they can see that actually what they're learning is not exactly so boring as what it seems like word problems.
So basically the theory that they learn, it needs to be shown to them that it's something that actually you experience and you encounter in your real life. Something you're not learning math for the sake of learning math, but you're learning math because that is something that you actually want to apply in your life.
Yeah, something like that. So at least they don't find that math is just math and it's just something boring to them, because to these students they already lost the interest in math, and and not doing well is also demoralizing, like what you said. So I think that to build up that kind of confidence and motivation to learn math, it has to be something fun to them and something that they find that, hey, oh, it's interesting. Maybe it's not as bad as I think. So we have to try to find all ways to improvise our lessons in order to let these students feel that I really want to learn math. It's not just about getting A for exams, but it's also to understand that, oh, math is what we can use in real life, and it's also interesting to know that, oh, certain concepts that we learn is useful to us. Like for example, north, south, east, west directions. It comes into something useful for us when we are reading maps in real life. So without that, I mean, when you see a map, you see N, S, E, where W, you don't know what it means, but you actually learn it in math in primary school.
So, what do you think we can strive to do better in terms of helping the students who are basically the weaker students that we have in our classes? Any particular additional assistance that we are able to give them?
I would think that to help them to come up with a structure in learning is it will be helpful for them, because sometimes when you give them work to do, they will usually do it before the day before lesson, and then they will just rush through everything. But I think giving them a proper structure to tell them, okay, so this is how you actually should build up your concepts in certain topics. So how do they do that? Give them specific instruction to teach them how to actually handle those those areas that they need to improve on.
And that reminds me, I think sometimes you observe the problem within the students. You know that they are having certain issues with certain chapters, whereas some other topics they may be very strong. But unfortunately, because of the way the school syllabus is structured, they may not always receive the individualized help that they need. So I think that is something that we should be able to focus on, that we need to be able to do more to ensure that the individual students are treated not as a collective and not as a group of students, but they are being treated as each and every single student, because I think the results of every single student matters.
So like maybe would you like to give an example on how would you help a student that is particularly weak in, let's say, geometry as compared to topics like addition, subtraction?
So in terms of concepts, geometry is one of those subjects where conceptually it is more difficult for students to grasp. So what would help them more is, number one, to make the lesson more fun for them. Maybe instead of just on paper asking them to measure certain things and then finding certain angles or looking at certain shapes, get them to observe around the classroom or bring in certain props in order to help them to visualize exactly why are we learning angles? Why are we learning shapes? What is so important about these things? I think fundamentally when you're able to help them to see how the concepts are being applied, I think that is something that makes it a lot less abstract for them to actually understand. That's number one. And number two, of course, you need to give them additional practices. That you cannot run away from additional practices, but more than just giving them practices, such that you want to make sure the practices are directed, meaning that you give them some, but you don't overwhelm them. If you overwhelm them, that defeats the purpose. It becomes counterproductive because they will no longer be interested. But you provide sufficient practices and you deal with specific areas that you want them to work on, giving them just enough to make sure that they are able to adequately cover all the bases.
So it is something like differentiated instruction.
Yes, differentiated instruction to the extent where you even curate the kind of worksheets or the kind of assignments that are